Well, I guess that means we're starting.
I guess we're starting.
And welcome everyone, or should I have you welcome everyone? We haven't
Welcome,
even
everyone.
figured that
I'm Kathy
out.
Beal, and my host tonight is Heather Quinlan, who is an author, a documentarian, also a self-taught, self-appointed urban anthropologist, and actually a neighbor of mine. I can actually drive to her house and bring her coffee when such is needed.
Yes, as recently, Kathy is that wonderful. I had surgery, and then 2 days later, we had COVID for the first time, and Kathy very kindly dropped off Starbucks on our front porch, and then ran for her life. So I guess we are all here to celebrate Kathy Beal and the very festive Kathy Beal and her book, Confessions of a Third-Rate Goddess, Traipsing Through a World Gone Weird. A lot of you know Kathy from different times of her life, and a lot of you have known her more recently. I myself was introduced to Kathy through Travis, I believe, when I worked at Backstage Magazine, and I was hired to scope out the art scene in Houston, and I needed someone who could write for me. Kathy did a tremendous job, and I had that job for all of 4 months, and they let me go because then they decided they didn't want to know what was going on in the Houston scene. But our friendship has continued ever since. So thank you, Travis, for that, and thank you, Kathy, for being such a wonderful friend and for giving me the opportunity to write a blurb in this book and to be as much of a part of the book as I can. And so I think what maybe not, probably not everyone has read the book yet, but Kathy has picked a few selections that she would like to read. And maybe we'll start off with one of the three, Kathy, if you want to do them in order of the way that you read them out to me. Are you going to start with Goddesshood Revealed?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, I will say that one of the common reactions to this is, what do you mean third rate? Well, let me explain. Goddesshood Revealed. As I walked into a party last fall, I heard my name being invoked 2 rooms away. The voice belonged to the sole Christian minister in a gathering largely of Goths, Babylon 5 freaks, and neo-pagans. All I caught was something about my being a third-rate goddess with shrines in Poughkeepsie, New York, and several other cities with goofy names. Sweeping into the room, I took issue with the locations and demanded, what do you mean third rate? Well, Hera would be a first-rate goddess, Reverend Jeffrey explained, while a second rate would be along the lines of Persephone. So a third-rate goddess, I butted in, would be a goddess in the flesh? Exactly, he laughed. Later in the proceedings, our host shared chocolate he'd picked up in a duty-free shop. It's evil, moaned one guest. Reverend Jeffrey elaborated, it's the best kind of evil. Evil that can't serve you with a subpoena, I shot back. The minister dropped to his knees and bowed to his newly anointed deity. Everybody howled. Then we went back to the more important business of eating chocolate. And that is it.
And that is it for the reading.
That's my
Yeah.
excerpt. Very short.
Well, you know what I like about this in particular is that where you say I took issue with the locations and demanded why third rate. I would be less, well, maybe I would take issue with the locations too, and also why third rate. But you know what's interesting too is that you do lawyer shtick, and I think what a lot of people don't realize about Kathy or forget about Kathy is that she is a former attorney and has been or had been for several years. So I think what was it about this particular reading that it was why third rate? Is that why you chose this one in particular?
Yeah, I'm explaining the title, The Confessions of a Third-Rate Goddess. So
Yes, exactly. So, and I guess one of the things that I wanted to ask you too, and we talked about this before people joined, is that not so much why did you write this book, which is a question I'm sure you get asked a ton of times, but what is it that you want the reader to take away from this book? What do you want them to know about you? What do you want them to know about life, love, anything? What would that be?
this ended up being my answer to Sex in the City. It was a syndicated column in the early 90s, and I would read it and go, oh, you have no idea what it's really like out there. And I I started what unbelievably what was sort of a normal existence. I mean, yeah, there have always been aspects of my life and the people around me who have been that has been kind of outlier, but nonetheless, I was on the track for something that would pass for normal. And then once I got fired from my first law job, which was someday I will write about that. That was an amazing, strange experience. I decided, okay, fine, I will do anything I want and I will do everything because I had to suddenly scramble and make my own living. So I have been self-employed since then and started immediately on a dual career track, started being a freelance writer at the same time, and then just started doing all kinds of other things and ended up in the at the collision point of a whole bunch of substratas of society that basically had very little to do with each other except that they were coming through me. And as things would go on, I would stop and think, we were given a certain image of what was supposed to happen in our lives, and I wasn't seeing that happening. I mean, even for the people that did have jobs that continued and got married and had babies, it was like weirdness was just erupting everywhere. And I always had a bent towards writing down stuff that I saw. I've always been an observer. And so I just started chronicling it. Like, I'm going to write about this. So the takeaway from this book is that life is really strange. We're given a certain vision of the way things are supposed to be, and maybe that's much less so now. So, I mean, that's one thing, all right, that we had a certain image that was given to us that was our equivalent of in the 90s of what Leave It to Beaver was in the 60s, and it bore very little relationship to reality. So that's thing one. Thing two is I pulled all this together because this is all previously written stuff. I think the most recent piece in here is before 2010. How different our world is now than it was in the late 80s and 90s. And partially because of technology, partially the way we deal with each other is different. Social media has changed things. So this is a snapshot of a very strange moment in time, essentially. And although a lot of it happened in Houston, it's not entirely dependent on being there. All right. So it's more universal than that.
Got it.
That makes sense.
It does, yes, absolutely. And one of the things that I was also wondering is you had told me that your life went sideways, and I had asked you, was there ever a moment? I know for me, and I think there's probably several people here tonight who are the same way, are in the creative field, are not the 9 to 5 job, and there have been times where I have said, why did I just not want to do the usual that everyone else does? And I think when you say, because our world has changed so much and everyone points to social media, But you know, there is that world that's projected on it. Like I wanted to do a Facebook thing of just people sobbing, or just like people being miserable, and even if they're faking it, but just like the weeping page, the misery page, like everyone's always, you know, looking their best, and they're putting that foot forward. So and by and large, they are people who tend to have kind of your more straight edge jobs or whatever. But that also doesn't mean that they're necessarily in a perfect place inside, the inside matching the outside, so to speak. And I'm wondering, you know, for you, have you ever felt like, gee, I wish I had, you know, I had stayed a lawyer, or I
Well,
had, you know,
I am still
oh,
a
okay. I
lawyer.
thought you're,
I don't take new clients. My law licenses are still intact. I was the person who 5 years after law school, people would run into and go, "You're still practicing law?" Well, you know, I worked really hard to get to this point. I'm not going to throw the license away. It doesn't mean that's how I want to define myself. Um, no, I've never thought. No, and I've been times I've had temp jobs, I've had contract jobs, and there was one that had the possibility of turning into something longer term, and it had a really long commute. That was going to be worse, and I mean, like it was an hour and 30-minute commute in the summer, and once kids came back to school, it was going to be at least 2 hours back and forth in a hellish situation where everybody was being monitored, and there was some idiot who was accusing me of stealing her chair and complaining to our overseers that she didn't like the slant of the counter in the restroom because water was flowing down and hitting her. And I went, I can't be near this. This is such a waste. This is such a waste of time and energy. And like, really? No. So I have not been tempted. And I, you know, there have been choices, there have been sacrifices, there have been things that have been problems. I I know a lot of people who have made an awful lot more money, but um I haven't gone through 20 zillion divorces, and my health has been infinitely better, infinitely better. I was very, very ill in my 20s, and nope, nope. So I'm a self-amusing personality. I like to do a lot of different things, and doing a lot of different things put me in contact with huge masses of what I called the overeducated and underemployed, who did very, very interesting things. I was never bored. I was sick of it sometimes, a lot of drama. My life has definitely calmed down since I've moved to the Northeast. But there was never a lack of fodder for what I was writing about.
and some people just attract that. Um, the
I've been accused.
yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, and I think too, it's almost like, you know, the askew world is almost like a calling. Like, you know, I find a teacher, for instance, to be a calling, because there's no way I could get up in the morning every day and go in front of a classroom full of kids and teach. You would have to have a certain thing within you that is propelling you to do that. So that's what I feel is with you and with a lot of us, that we put up with, you know, maybe, yeah, we have to pay for our own insurance if we even have insurance, but at least we have a lot of autonomy and doing what we want to do. And with that, why don't we move on to the second reading, which in the book, which is the Blessed Visitation.
This is an excerpt from the Blessed Visitation. A lot of things show up in my mailbox that would never arrive in anyone else's. But even I am broadsided by what surfaces a couple of days into Passover on a dark, rainy April morn. It's heralded by a yellow slip marked parcel, which confuses me because the post office usually leaves a key in the box that matches up with a locker containing the posted goodie. The postal worker emerges from the back room, hoisting on her shoulder a carton the size of a toddler's coffin. My first reaction is terror. The need for checking with the bomb squad suggests itself. I stare at the return address until the point of origin sinks in. The filter between conscious mind and wild-eyed rambling shuts down, and I blurt, "Baby Jesus is in this box!" The postal worker blinks at the obvious sign of possession, and I am compelled to answer, "I'm not kidding! Baby Jesus is in this box!" The Annunciation. I'd been warned 8 months earlier that he might be coming. In the Nevada desert, where a ladies' fetish and taboo society contingent had traveled for fun and games with the San Francisco Cacophony Society, now known as Burning Man, a ringleader named Michael, who'd been sending correspondence under the name Genevieve, had alerted us of baby Jesus. The visitor had slipped away from a creche in front of a church in the Midwest and had been touring the country, all the while writing letters to the folks back home. Maybe he'd like to come to Houston someday, our informant had suggested. "Every traveling statue in the country is going to come to your mailbox," retorted Doc, who should know. He has himself placed a beat-up bust of Richard Wagner in it. The package will not fit into the car. I put it in the trunk and whisk it homeward. What am I going to do with this? I wish I'd got some advance notice so I could have planned an appropriate event to honor his coming. But then the Lord works in mysterious ways. I'm bombarded by a slew of outrageous turns of thought that beg for lightning. Nothing compares to the serenity a girl has driving around secure in the knowledge that the savior of the world is in her trunk. All the post offices in the world, and he has to walk into mine. I guess this makes me blessed among women. And what does this mean as omen? Personal rebirth? Grace arrived in my post office box. "I got baby Jesus for Easter. What did you get?" What would Joseph Campbell have made of this?
And lo, a story was born. I just I like Uncle Floyd. I like to have props. This is the Infant of Prague. It's my baby Jesus. We all should have one. This belonged to my grandma. I inherited the Infant of Prague, and at her funeral proceeded to accidentally sit on it. But it's still in one piece. I did sit on Jesus, but
Well, I took him to a gay bar, so we're even.
Let he or she who is without sin, etc., etc. So yes, I wanted to show off my Infant of Prague, and my husband crawled behind me to get it out of my room. So tell us a little bit about baby Jesus. So this was, as I understand it, a traveling Jesus.
Yeah, it really was. It was a baby from a creche. And there's a photo of it in the book. It's a photo of me holding it in the book.
Yes.
And it was well, okay. The San Francisco.
Explain to the less informed of us what exactly a creche is.
Oh, that's a nativity scene.
Okay.
A big nativity scene. All right. So someone had liberated Jesus from I think it was in Indiana. And when this happened, Michael, whom I'd known as Genevieve, I didn't know what was sending me this mail. Background, I got to know these people through trading stuff in the mail. This was a massive part of life in certain circles in the 90s. Zines, self-published periodicals, and I would get the San Francisco Cacophony Society rantings in return for my zine. So when I finally met, they knew enough about me that when I showed up at Burning Man, they knew my name and they knew who I was and sent people to find my campsite, which is before it was all plotted out as it is now. So I was, the guy who was in charge of it, who now goes by Danger Ranger, and he's one of the people who set the whole SantaCon business in motion decades ago in San Francisco. Anyway, he decided that I would be an appropriate recipient for this stolen Christ child. And so I showed him a good time, took him many places. In fact, there are people on this call who were part of, who are mentioned. We took him to a gay bar. We took him to a gay bar for Easter weekend. It was, and he was feted. People sang him songs, tried to buy him drinks. It was, I'm serious. Did many, many things. And then after a while, I got my marching orders and sent him off. But so Jesus in various forms is a recurring character in this book because it's kind of like a leitmotif. It wasn't that I went looking for it. Jesus showed up backstage at the
Yeah, Jesus finds you. Yes.
Jesus finds me in many ways. Although I did, I mean, I caught wind of Jesus and then hired him in a silent auction to show up at a friend's birthday party. She had done a lot of time as a singing telegram person. Her guests were rather freaked out. It was a lesbian dinner party, and Jesus in a loincloth carrying his cross showed up at oh, hopefully they didn't try to buy the baby Jesus of Bloody Mary. Oh God, we have lightning being asked for in the comments here. Anyway, so there's this whole Jesus sub-thread, and there's also the traveling statue sub-thread, because those of you who know me well know that I had a long association with a prankster who has a beat up bust of Richard Wagner, and I got sucked into taking it many places, and there are many travels of Wagner in the book as well. And these actually, one of these actually did appear in the Houston Press. All right, so I was a columnist for a real newspaper that was like the Village Voice or the New York Press, and I had an editor who would publish essentially anything I sent her, which was insane, but fine. Weird things would happen. I'd write about it. She'd go, "Oh, it's Christmas." That's really, she told me it was like Christmas when she'd open the mail. We had mail then. And when she see something from me. But a lot of the others, and so I wrote about that. I wrote about the Wagner nonsense for the Houston Press. But I also wrote a lot about it in my zine. So my zine was one of the wordier ones in the zine world. A lot of them were just photocopied. Mine was initially just a bunch of photocopied stories of really weird things that I would find, and then it sort of morphed into, well, strange stuff is happening, so let's just write about it, and it turned into desktop publishing. And in fact, Rex, who is here, was one of the people who formatted it and got it all going for a period of time. I became obsessed with playing because it was another playing field, another playing board, another, how can I finger paint? And I had alternating footers at the bottom. Often I would take a review and stick it as the footer for that issue. Always Amusing, Always Confusing was one that was there a lot. And then there would be a footer down the middle of it, and I would put whatever I wanted. I had entire stories. Like I think I wrote about a family reunion on a mountain in West Virginia with some really incestuous undertones. Hey, West Virginia. And the whole story was in the footer at the bottom. I got a lot of complaints about font size, which I now understand. I didn't understand them then. So,
well, that's part of the fun. Do you think, would you ever go back to zines again?
well, there are, I don't know. I don't know if I would go to the trouble. I
was going to say, it's a lot of work. It's,
I have
you had a
compared
band and you wanted to promote your band. I'd
Mhm.
say, yeah, maybe.
Well,
Yeah.
and the world is really different in that regard too, because there were catalogs of zines, and you would subscribe to the catalog, and then you'd read it and see who was putting out what, and you would send a request for a sample issue, or you would take it upon yourself to send your zine to somebody and say, "Hey, want to trade?" And I did meet people there. There's someone on the call I met from sending me a zine when he was in high school, and we became friends.
Who is
I was
this?
Matthew Foster.
Oh,
I've known from those days, and from the zine world, and the co-author of my first book I knew from the zine world, and the sordid tale of that book deal is in the book. So I wrote about stuff in the zine that was this way beyond what I could possibly foist off in the Houston Press. And And also a lot of stuff that I would not now.
So I would say like this is almost like zine, and like everything that you couldn't fit in a zine, but you can fit into a book, kind of like that.
As an aspect of it. And one thing that carries over, and Noah did a wonderful job with the design in that regard. My zine had it's the original unfact-checked media. Yes. I always had clip art, lots and lots of clip art, and like especially from the 20s. For some reason, that's what really spoke to me, because I would also play with the voice a lot, and I would write in something that like approximated 1920s New Yorker style. So I had images that fit with it, and Noah was really good about. I mean, I selected a lot of what I wanted, but there's definitely a this is from another time and space vibe to the little illustrations that are just dropped throughout the book.
And I think that brings us to our third and final reading, which is Welcome Back, You Must Be Going, which I can really say the title says it all.
It does. Groucho and Gabe Kaplan in one phrase, and also my attitude about it. All right. Gabe Kaplan doing a one-man show about Groucho Marx sounded like a good idea. Well, after all, the former stand-up comic turned pro card player peppered his 1970s sitcom Welcome Back Kotter with nod after nod to the Marx Brothers. So much for assumptions. Part of the oddness radiated out from the location, an operation that debuted under the moniker the Sid Caesar Dinner Theater. Its advertising was strangely appropriate, giving off the faintly moth-eaten air that pervades such late career misfortunes of the brothers Marx as the big store. Kaplan's colleagues in the first season lineup were the likes of Frank Gorshin, Lee Merriweather, and Mal Z. Lawrence. Kaplan may have had the greatest or most recent fame, but they had it over him in the headshot reproduction department. His had the resolution of surveillance camera work in the season brochure. The theater didn't have its own space, or even an outside sign. It consisted of a small elevated stage and a bunch of long communal tables in a ballroom at a special events center on Long Island, a once stately white mansion that had spawned two increasingly larger, stuccoed, box-like additions. If a parking lot attendant hadn't told us to go to the back of the lot, who knows how long we would have spent wandering around corridors dotted with antique-looking furniture and lobbies filled with gargantuan chandeliers and maroon-carpeted walls decorated with gilt-framed paintings of flowers. Kaplan opened with some well-targeted asides. He's too tall. His nose is too big. His nose is too small. Well, for this afternoon, let's pretend that I'm Groucho and that this is a real theater. Alas, both illusions took a beating. Kaplan was a surprisingly ineffective Groucho. No sense of cadence or sentence melody or inflection. He did work off the audience well, a couple of hundred elderly Jewish people and a couple of goyim in the back, and throw in some good quips. Laying the groundwork for Groucho's placing his savings in the stock market and facing ruin in the 1929 stock market crash, Kaplan tossed off, I know what happens to actors who don't have any money. They end up in dinner theaters. The Jewish ones end up in kosher dinner theaters. But he couldn't sing. He couldn't even match pitches with the piano or stay in one key. His "Hello, I must be going" was one long argument for pushing him off the stage. At the end, when he and the piano player and the utility actress, who played every female part, came out and launched into Lydia the Tattooed Lady, only the pianist's voice sailed through loud and clear, raising suspicions in my vicinity that Kaplan's body mic had been turned off. According to Newsday, Kaplan acknowledged that he isn't as good a singer as Groucho, which is why this show was subtitled A Life in Review rather than the usual A Life in Revue. So it was all the more surprising when, nearing the end, Kaplan sat at a dressing table with his back to the audience, changed his makeup, turned around, and was 87-year-old Groucho. A ringer. Even more so once he opened his mouth. Old Groucho, he can do. The phrasing, the sound of the voice, the mannerisms, every bit. It was almost frightening. A phrase that sums up the whole experience, actually. The cooling system was in overdrive. People were bundling up as best they could during the first act. During the intermission, some people bolted while others griped to anyone they could find. The bartender said the problem was in the hands of theater management because the temperature was required by the performer's contract. An officious person was strutting around the place, dodging kvetching, shivering elderly people. Instead of offering any kind of acknowledgement to the uprising at the head of our table, he barked something like, "We know, it's being taken care of," and fled. "For this amount of money, we could see a show on Broadway," a man announced from the head of my table. Maybe so, but would it have had such a floor show? When the show stopped, the kvetching didn't. It moved downstairs to the ladies' room. A woman with a cane groaned, "I really have to go," like a mantra as she pushed her way up through the line when I was second from the front. Being the youngest person in the room, I decided to let her through, whereupon she tried to shove the woman at the front out of the way. "I really have to go. I really have to go," they shouted back and forth. When they finally shuffled out and I was able to take refuge in a stall, the talk outside my door turned ugly. "First they poison us, then they freeze us, and then they complain we're unresponsive," somebody called out. Someone else targeted Groucho. He was an obnoxious man. His son wrote a book about him. It was an awful book. He was poison to his son. There were widespread murmurs of approval. Maybe the theater official knew something after all. Followed its lead.
That one was particularly near and dear to my heart. On a personal note, Groucho, that show was the first show I ever did on summer. Not that show, but the show was the first summer stock show. Indeed, the first non-high school theater show I ever worked on. And yeah, 3 people. So he would play Groucho. There was one woman playing all the women parts, and then one guy playing all the Marx Brothers and assorted other men. And yeah, it was the Frank Ferranti years. And say what you will about Frank Ferranti, I thought it went very well. But you know, as far as Gabe Kaplan goes, you can look like Groucho, but that doesn't mean you can act like Groucho. And it's you know, I think what's funny is you would think it would be a natural. And you know what? I think probably a lot of it came from the fact that Gabe Kaplan thought this was way beneath him. I mean, even worse than dealing with Horseshack. So he just, acted accordingly. So that would be my assumption. I don't know. I don't know Gabe Kaplan. I know he's very good at poker. And he had a show in the 70s and he did briefly play Groucho Marx, and that is the sum total of my knowledge of Gabe Kaplan. See, I already can't tell them apart. That's how good he was. So one quick thing that I wanted to, and if there's anything else you wanted to add about Gabe Kaplan or Groucho.
Well, Groucho's a recurring figure in this also.
Yes. And I think most of the people on here know that you were in I'll Say She Is, which was a revival of a Marx Brothers stage play that was done several years ago. And
there are only 200 people on this planet scheme of things. The man who hosted the party where I was dubbed the third-rate goddess was the producer and the Groucho in the Marx Brothers spoof that put me in touch with the Wyaduck website. I was in a ridiculous project, well written but ridiculous, called Horse Phasers, that put the Marx Brothers on the deck of the Starship Enterprise, which I will show people on request. And that led me to meet the owner of the largest Marx Brothers fan site, which is why I moved to New York initially, why I left Texas to be with this person. So the guy that hosted that party and gave us the chocolate that was evil, the best kind of evil, also said was a player in this being set in motion.
and we should also give props to Noah Diamond, who, in addition to designing the cover of the book, also played Groucho Marx. And I'll say he is, she is, and was fantastic in it as well. And it was like Groucho was right there. I never felt that way about Gabe Kaplan. So I guess, we will open it up to the group. Would you like to do that?
Yeah, I'm going to turn the recording off so people can feel free to